Hello, this is Deborah Anderson, the Black Woman Animator, coming back to you with another video. And in this video, I have Musa Brooker. Welcome.
Hello. Great to talk to you.
So, I would like to start this off by saying how we got here from my end. So, a couple months ago, I was sitting there and, I'm highlighting Black animation professionals on my channel. And I'm like, are there any prominent Black people in stop motion animation? And so after one of my posts went viral a couple months ago, and there was like a lot of people following me, and so I didn't check everybody's profile, but I checked one person's profile, and he was a Black guy who is dabbled in stop motion. So I was like, let me ask him. And so I asked him, and he mentioned you. So, and then I emailed you.
Oh wow! Who was the person?
Well, I would like to thank Sigmund Washington.
Oh yeah.
And thank you for letting me know about Musa. So that's how
Yes,
we got to this point.
Awesome.
I want to start off with, where are you from and how was it growing up?
Yeah, I am. I'm West Philadelphia, born and raised. And yeah, now everybody's got that song in their head.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up, my whole life in Philly, and my dad is a painter and an art professor. Retired. He's retired now from teaching. Still paints. And my mother was a school teacher, and my stepmother was worked at the Philadelphia Art Museum. She was an executive at the Philadelphia Art Museum. So art and teaching actually were both big parts of my life growing up, since both my parents taught, and my stepmom and father were both involved in the art world. And I knew pretty early on that I wanted to work in animation. I loved cartoons, I loved comics, comic books, and I just knew at about 5 that I wanted to work in cartoons and make animation. So, every time there was a project, a report in school, I would do it somehow related to comics or animation. So, yeah, absolutely. In 5th grade, I wrote a bio on Walt Disney, and in high school, I did a report. In music class, we had to do a report. So I did, a presentation about the music in animation, and anyway, so yeah, it was just a big part of my life. I knew that I wanted to do that, and so I worked towards that. I knew I wanted to go to college for that, so and so I did. I went to the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, and I do remember growing up, and there was a point where everyone I knew stopped watching Saturday morning cartoons, but I just kept watching Saturday morning cartoons.
Research.
Yes, exactly. I even had like a cartoon appreciation society in high school.
You were all in.
Oh, I was all in. Yeah, for sure. So I went to, I studied animation at the University of the Arts, and, for me, it was like, I had always liked cartoons, just Disney, Warner Brothers, Tex Avery. But in high school, in the time when I was growing up, there were a lot of independent animation festivals that were touring in smaller theaters, art house theaters. And so around that time, I got to, I just knew that I loved animation. So I would go to these things, and I would see different kinds of animation that I, weren't accessible in the ways they are now. This was pre-internet, not pre-internet, but pre-massive internet, I suppose. and you couldn't just look up something on YouTube. There was no YouTube, so
Right.
the ability to see that kind of animation was a little bit harder to get. So I would go to these festivals, and just sort of it opened up my mind to different kinds of animation. And then in school, that process sort of continued. In that I was exposed to really experimental, independent animation, abstract animation in a way that I hadn't been before. So I kind of just soaked it all in, and it broadened my love of the art form.
Nice.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't, not as, maybe now is a little bit different, but certainly at the time, not as many people knew about or were exposed to sort of experimental and fine art, independent animation. It just was, at least when I was growing up, it was Hanna-Barbera, Disney, Looney Tunes, and I love that stuff and still do.
Right.
But it was great to be exposed to other stuff, and yeah, I also I took there was one class in the program that was a stop motion class, and we were and it was great. We got to make a bunch of short film projects, different kinds of stop motion, clay and objects, and we built puppets and all sorts of stuff. So I made 3 or 4 projects with a partner over the course of the semester. And yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't I hadn't really intended to pursue stop motion specifically. I just loved animation in general. And so I tried to do a little bit of everything in school, a little bit of CG. It was pretty primitive CG at the time, but I definitely did some of that. Definitely, 2D traditional and some stop motion. But 2D traditional cartoon animation was kind of my first love, right?
Yeah.
And I finished up at school, and I very fortunately got a job right out of school, working for a software company. Yeah, I was very excited. I thought the interview went terrible. I didn't think that they were gonna. I was like, oh, I don't even know about this.
Right.
But of course, that was the company that hired me. So it was great. I was working in Delaware. I was commuting from Philly to Delaware, working for a software company. We were making sort of. And this will date me, but we were making educational entertainment CD-ROMs, right, for kids. So
how long was the commute?
Too long. It was. I think it was maybe an hour and a half. And I would either take the train or get a ride.
I know your pain.
Yeah.
When I was in New Orleans, that's where I was before. I worked in New Orleans. I lived in New Orleans, worked in Baton Rouge, so that was like 110 mile a day.
Oh wow!
Commute.
And how long did that take?
I could do it in an hour.
Wow.
In the morning, and then an hour and a half in the evening.
Yeah.
Kind of broke some rules, but hey, gotta get where you gotta.
Exactly.
Gotta get somewhere. So.
Yeah, it's funny though, because in LA, I've commuted places, and it was like 2 hours in LA, just because of traffic. So going from one city to a whole other city on the East Coast is a little bit different. But it was it was a good learning experience. I was there for a year. I got to learn Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff that again, at the time, maybe it was just my school, but it wasn't something that I learned in school. When I went to school, it was still very traditional, hand drawn. We drew everything on paper. We shot on an actual Oxberry camera, with film. Our pencil test machine was at the time it was a big deal because it was a videotape pencil test machine. So wow, so it
High
was
tech.
yeah, yeah. So it was pre-digital,
Mm-hmm.
but which again will date me. But um,
It's
but
okay. You have wisdom.
yeah, that's what I tell myself. um, but yeah, so overall it was a good experience. The company got bought out maybe 8 months into the time I was there. It was sold, acquired, and then after about a year, it was shut down. they
Oh
basically
wow.
wanted they basically wanted the assets. It was a good first experience. Luckily, I was able to save up a lot of money, which was good because I was still living at home.
Nice.
But after that, I had a couple of sort of odd jobs. I was working at a startup, a CG startup in
Mm.
Philadelphia, which was an odd experience, but I learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I knew that I wanted to not necessarily get out of Philly, but get into a bigger studio, a bigger,
Yeah.
just a different situation. Um, and I applied for. I had met some people at MTV Animation at the time. That was the biggest East Coast animation studio. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd met some people there. I think maybe through school even, and kept in touch with them. Applied, took a couple of tests. Was turned down at first. They said I did okay, but it wasn't quite. I didn't quite
Yeah.
get in. And then I finally got in after about, I don't know, 8 months of applying to different things. And I got hired as a layout artist on the show Daria. I don't know if you remember that show. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Of course. Yes, I
yeah,
do.
yeah. It's funny. It's retro now, but at the time it was like a hip new thing.
Yeah,
It's been,
I like Daria.
yeah, it's a good show. It's funny. Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So I then was commuting to New York from Philly, which was 2 hours door to door. Um, Yeah, yeah, but it was nice because I took the train. I didn't even have a
Oh, that's
license at
good.
the time, but I took the train, and I could sleep on the train or whatever. But so I was there for a season of Daria,
Mhm.
doing. I was a layout artist, and so
Nice.
it was a good experience. Met a lot of cool people. Um, it was rough because they hired me at first for like 2 to 3 weeks. I was filling in for someone, and that person didn't come back.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they kept extending me a couple of weeks at a time. At a certain point, they just said, "Well, you can stay for the rest of the season." So I didn't want to move without a sort of a steady job. Didn't want to move to New
Yeah.
York. Um, and it was a tough job. It was kind of trial by fire. I think I did okay, but
Mm-hmm.
I kind of didn't expect to be asked back, frankly, for the following season. Um,
Why
and
not?
luck. Um, I mean, I don't. I just got that vibe from my supervisor that he felt like I did okay. He was kind of rough on me. He actually at a party. Uh, maybe about a year later, he was drunk and he apologized for how tough he was on me. So that was nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just didn't think I was going to get asked back, and so luckily enough, they had aired a Super Bowl halftime special for a concept called Celebrity Deathmatch, and yeah, and it had gone well, and they decided to make it into a whole show, and they were looking for people, and I luckily had taken that class in
Yeah.
school. This is just a couple of years out of school, so I still had that footage, and put a little reel together, showed it to the show's creator and the producers, and they liked it, and they hired me as an assistant animator on that.
Nice.
And so that kind of changed my whole trajectory of my career, basically. One of the
Just a
things that
little pivot.
yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I loved about it was that I was animating. I wasn't, layout artist is great. It's a good job. I was happy to have it, but I liked animating. And so I got a chance to animate in stop motion, where I was just drawing, just copying poses and stuff as a layout artist. And so that was a thrill. And they kind of didn't know what they were doing. It was a relatively new thing. They had never done it at the studio. They basically converted some offices into shooting spaces, which is not really how you're supposed to do it.
Right.
But as everybody was learning as we went, and but the way that they organized the shooting was they had multiple shooting rooms. And they had hired an assistant animator and a directing animator for each room. And I think at the time there were like 15 stages, 15 rooms, and or something like that. Maybe it was a little bit less. But for some reason there was an odd number of assistant animators. So I very luckily got placed in a room with another assistant animator, and got to animate more than I would have had I been paired with a directing animator, which was great.
Okay.
I got a lot more hands-on experience. That method of 2 people per shoot room changed relatively quickly, but right at the beginning I got to animate more than I would have, so got a little bit more experience. And they changed it. The standard is sort of 1 animator per stage, and so that's what we moved to. And then at that point, it wasn't really directing animators and assistants. It was just everybody was an animator.
Yeah.
And I moved to New York. I moved to Brooklyn, Fort Greene, Brooklyn at the time. Had a great little studio apartment. Commuted to, MTV Animation was 1633 Broadway. It was right across the street from the Winter Garden with cats. Cats forever. And it was great. It was great. It was, there's no place like New York. So it was, we worked hard but it was a good experience overall. And that I sort of cut my teeth on that project. That was the first professional project as a stop motion animator. And then I kind of followed the work from there. And then spent 25 years in the field of stop motion.
How important was, I'm assuming you had a lot of support from your parents, particularly as Black people growing up, we don't always receive support going into art, but luckily you had a lot of art related. I mean, you had your dad and your stepmom, and then I'm sure your mom was supportive. So how important was that to have growing up and to pursue like animation?
I don't know any other way, any other experience, obviously, but yeah, my parents were incredibly supportive. Like I said, my dad is a fine artist. He's a painter and he's in the fine art world. But he was always supportive. He loves, pop culture and he grew up on comics and loves sci-fi. And so, he was always supportive. Both my mom and my dad and my stepmom were all incredibly supportive growing up, and encouraged me very early to take art classes. And I just drew all the time. And they never wavered in their support, and even now, they're very supportive. So I imagine, I know a lot of people that have parents, particularly in college, that just didn't have the support, didn't have family that understood that you can make a career in art. It's not, certainly there are starving artists, but animation is a fairly commercial art form,
Yeah.
and so yeah, they never wavered in their support. But I know people that did have a lot more difficulty convincing their parents that art
Hmm.
was a viable career. But for me, it was never an issue. So
I know your like background was like what you studied was mostly 2D, but what do you love about stop motion that you either got initially or you've gained throughout your career?
um, I love almost everything about stop motion. To be honest, again, I love animation as a medium, as an art form. I love
Yeah.
CG. I love 2D. I love experimental abstract characters. I just feel like it's an art form unlike any other. It
Yeah.
incorporates every art discipline: acting, drawing,
Hmm.
designing, writing, music. It's everything is in there, and that's one of the things I love about animation in general: the diversity of the art form, the broadness of the art form. You can make a silly little cartoon, or you can make a protest film. You can, have an
Right.
abstract painting, or you can, have a little, visual poem, or whatever.
Hmm.
There's so many things that you can do. um, one of the things that I love about stop motion specifically is the craft, is the handcrafted quality of it. It's that sort of
Hmm.
artisan feel. It's very tactile, it's very textural. um, One of the things that I often struggled with when I was working in 2D was, you have to redraw everything over and over again,
Yeah,
and
that's why
some,
2D was not my ministry.
and so it's hard, to keep things on model, and it's,
Yeah.
you've got to really have some serious drawing chops, and I was, I was pretty good, but um, that was harder for me. And in
Hmm.
stop motion, it's there, you just have to move it, and so it's more about the animation than it is about the drawing. And
Right.
you get more, it's more like a performance, because it happens, unlike other kinds of animation, it happens once. You can't really, you can cut back frames, but you can't really noodle, and not in the same way. In 2D and CG, you create animation through passes. Like you'll do the
Hmm.
torso, you'll
Yeah.
do the legs, or you'll block things in, and then you'll add the details. In animation, it's all at once, all at the same time. So it's very much like a theater performance, just really
Hmm.
stretched out. You have that one chance to get it right. So there's something
Yeah.
fun about that tightrope walk, that's really engaging. It takes a lot of concentration, but I love that aspect of it.
Nice. Can you well actually because you mentioned experimental animation earlier, is there some experimental animation people or movies or whatever that you want to put people onto that people need to see?
Yeah, there's a ton. Norman McLaren did some amazing work, both in stop motion and scratch on film,
Hmm.
2D animation. He's a Canadian animator. Just did some amazing work. Lin Lai does
Hmm.
abstract animation as well. Really beautiful stuff. Going way back, Oscar Fissinger is a one of the pioneers of that kind of work. He did a lot of actually clay animation, sort of on a down shooter. Um,
Hmm.
there's people like Caroline Leaf, who does sand animation. It's not abstract, but really beautiful work like that. There's so many, but yeah. Those are sort
Uh,
of older animators, but yeah.
yeah. So can you list the various roles? I mean, you don't have to list like all of them. I don't know how many there are, but like, can you list the various roles in stop motion animation off the top of your head? Since people usually only think of the animator, but like, what are some other roles in stop motion?
So I do teach. I teach animation at USC, and
Okay.
so one of the things that I often try to communicate is that there are there is more than just animators and directors in stop motion. There's a whole list of crew members and artisans and craftsmen and artists that contribute to a project. Just exactly like you said, because people don't really realize that.
Yeah.
So of course we've got the animator, but before, I think one of the things that I found is a big prologue, but one of the things that I found, and even people that know other kinds of animation, when it comes to stop motion, people are like, I don't know anything, and what's funny is there's so much that's the same. So in the same way in CG, where like you got to design stuff, the same thing is true in stop motion. So there are designers, there are after something is designed, when it needs to be built, those people are called fabricators. So there are fabricators, there are different kinds of fabricators. There are people that specialize in props. There are people that specialize in set building. There are people that specialize in character building, character fabricators. There's armaturists who make, an armature in stop motion is the bones of the puppet that allows you to move it and pose it. So there are people that concentrate just on making the armatures, and there's different kinds of armatures. There's ball and socket armatures, which are machined parts that fit together. There are wire armatures that are made with aluminum armature wire. So there's different techniques for that. So there are armaturists, there are painters, obviously, very much like live action. One of the things that I say is stop motion is a lot like live action, just miniaturized and spread out over time, right?
Yeah.
So, just like you've got to have a production designer that designs the sets, you've got to have a production designer for sets in stop motion. It's the same thing, it's just shrunk down. You have to have set builders who build the sets. A whole other discipline is painting, right? So you have to have people, sometimes people have multiple skills and can jump around in different departments, but usually the set builder is not the same person who paints the set. That's a very specific discipline, so they can get different kind of textures. The fabricators sort of build the bones, and then the painters, just like a scenic painter in the live action world, will paint the details and stuff. There are graphic designers that have to design signs. There are set dressers and art directors who, again, just like in live action, the set will be there, but then they have to add the details. Oh, this kind of lamp needs to be there, or this kind of rug, and they decorate the set, before it's
so kind of like an interior designer.
Similar, yeah. It's yeah. I mean, it's a little bit different, but yeah, very similar. There are, there is the camera and lighting team, which again is very much like a live action crew. There's a DP, there's gaffers, there are, grips. A lot of times in stop motion production, those roles are combined to something that we call lighting tech. And so that's sort of a general catch-all name for a crew member on the lighting team. A show like, a sort of a standard television show, lighting and camera crew may have, I don't know, maybe 5 to 7 people on the crew, including the DP, and they're responsible for multiple stages. Depends on the size of the production. But so they can all sort of jump in and do different things. And what else is there? There's, there are production coordinators and PAs, and, very much like traditional live action filmmaking or other kind of animation filmmaking. There are also, we have schedulers. We use in stop motion, we often use something called the big board. in which you put up all of your shots on the storyboards.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are listed out so that you can keep track of who's shooting what animators on what stage, what puppets are on what stage. It's all organized by date and day and stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a visual indication of everything that you're doing in production on stages. And that's a very specific thing that there are schedules and other kinds of animation, but understanding the big board is a pretty specific thing to stop motion. So that's some of that's some of them. I don't know if that's all of them, but yeah.
I mean, I actually have a jobs in animation series, which is like just these short, like 1 to 2 minute. Some are a little bit longer, but like, oh, so you like to draw? Here's what you should do. So you like to boss people around? Here's what you should do. Like, so, like jobs in animation. So I feel like that's mostly why I had you listed out, so people know, like, oh, okay, I can do some of these things. Oh, that sounds like something I'm interested in. I can do it in animation. So
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that is so great about stop motion, the diversity of not just the content that you're creating, but the diversity of roles. There's so many. If you're interested in art, if you're interested in writing, if you're interested in production, there's a role for you in stop motion production. So, yeah.
So can you what are the or where are the stop motion animation hubs across the country and even maybe around the world? I'm not sure.
Yeah. There are a number of stop motion hubs. There's actually, we're in the time of Corona, so it's a little bit trickier right now. One of the things that is tough about stop motion that's different from CG and 2D is that you do need a crew. You do need people on a stage doing stuff. And so that has slowed down production for sure. But until Corona, there was more stop motion production going on now than any other time really in the history of filmmaking, which is amazing. I would say the two main hubs in the States are LA, and there's about five decent sized studios that do stop motion here in LA. There are lots of other smaller studios. There are commercial houses that do stop motion occasionally, or specific kinds of stop motion. But there are a number of stop motion specific studios right here in LA, and the same thing is true of Portland, Oregon. That's actually where I moved right after working at MTV. I moved up to Portland to work for Will Vinton Studios, which Will Vinton is known for creating the California Raisins and the Noid from Domino's and lots of different, he's known for claymation. A lot of people think claymation is like Band-Aid or Kleenex. It is actually a trademarked term. And so people refer to clay animation as claymation, just like they refer to any plastic adhesive strip as a Band-Aid, but it's actually a specific thing.
I gotta do a video on that. I gotta research that.
It may have fallen into public domain, but for years it was a very closely guarded trademark. But where was I? What was I saying? What were we talking about?
Portland.
Oh, Portland, that's right. Yeah, thank you. So Portland is a hub as well. For years, San Francisco was a hub, although that's where Nightmare Before Christmas was shot, and James and the Giant Peach. Henry Selick was based out of San Francisco for many years, so that's part of where that hub was. James and the Giant Peach
is like one of my favorite movies.
It's a good one. There's some beautiful animation there, absolutely.
And I think I have a do I have a Nightmare Before Christmas? Oh, I have the pocket watch.
Oh yeah.
Nice. I bought it from Etsy. Like it's like I wear it as a necklace.
Nice. Nightmare is one of my favorite films. That I actually took a class trip that came out when I was in college, and again, for me at the time, it was like 2D animation was my thing, and it was the Disney Renaissance, and Beauty and the Beast came out, and that just like blew my mind. But
Right.
you know, Nightmare also came out at that time, and I just remember going to see it and just like was floored by the quality of animation and just seeing it on the big screen. Just kind of blew my mind. Anyway, so and it's still one of my favorites. It's a great film, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Portland was a hub because of Will Vinton. He started Will Vinton Studios up there. He won an Oscar and moved back home to Oregon and started a studio up there. That studio, under new ownership, is what became Leica. So it's the
Oh,
same
wow.
studio, just owned by different people, name change, but so many of the same people that I knew when I worked there still work there.
Animation history.
Yeah. Stop motion is an incredibly small community, so
Yeah.
you know it's very specialized. So a lot of the same people, you know, Portland's a great town, and a lot of the same people, you know, they love Portland, and it's a great place to work. So they continue. And then there's a number of offshoots from, because a lot of people, you know, again, I was recruited from New York to go there. A lot of my coworkers and friends were also recruited to go there. A lot of people from San Francisco, from Peach and Nightmare, moved up to Portland to work up there at the time. And so, you know, a lot of, when there wasn't as much work, people founded their own smaller studios.
Yeah.
So there are a number of studios in Portland, from House Special, which is it's an offshoot. So this is a bit complicated. So there was Will Vinton Studios. They had sort of a commercial division and sort of an entertainment division. Then that became Leica. Leica had they had Leica House, which was the commercial division, and then they had the feature division. At some point, Travis Knight, who is the CEO of Leica, decided that he didn't want or need the commercial division anymore. And the creative heads of the commercial division were allowed to spin that off into their own company. So what was Will Vinton Studios became Leica House, which became House Special. So they still exist, and they're still doing stop motion and CG in Portland. There's also a place called Bent Image Labs, which is another number of former Vinton employees founded their own studio up there. So that's another studio. And I believe there's a couple of others, I'm forgetting their names, but yeah, so that's a hub. San Francisco used to be a hub, not as much anymore. Although I'm sure that there's some stop motion production going on there, it's not a hub like it used to be. And then LA, here in LA, you know, there's a number of studios that produce stop motion of all different kinds. Stupid Buddy Studios, Kyoto Brothers, Screen Novelties, Starburns Industries. There's a bunch of a bunch of stuff, and then there's also smaller commercial houses that do places like Wood Shop that I've worked for. I worked for all these places, but small world. They do a lot of tabletop food-based stop motion, which is a whole other ballgame. Yeah.
So what are the hubs around the world?
You know, I think there are more places in the UK. There are not more places. There are a lot of places in the UK. You know, obviously that is the hub. Bristol's the hub of Aardman. And I think, you know, I'm not as familiar now, but there used to be a place called Loose Moose, and there were a number of other stop motion specific companies there. So I think animation, you know, in other parts of the world, animation is not viewed simply as kids entertainment, and so there is a wider diversity of kinds of animation that's produced. So there's definitely some in the UK. Eastern Europe has a tradition of stop motion as well, and you have people like Yuri Trinka or Jan Svinkmeyer that produce animation there as well. And there there used to be, during the Cold War, there were actually government-sponsored programs in Russia and the Czechoslovakia, then Czech Republic now, that
Mm-hmm.
produced animation. There's a history of Hungarian animation as well. I don't know how active that community is right now,
Mm-hmm.
to my chagrin, but people like George Powell, who's a
Mm-hmm.
Hungarian filmmaker, who created what are called the Puppetoons. My dad actually
Mm-hmm.
took me to see the Puppetoon movie, which is a compilation of all these shorts, and it just blew my mind when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a kind of replacement animation that's it looks
Okay.
very different than sort of in stop motion, you can have a puppet that's armatured and
Right.
move, so it's the same puppet that's moving around. But you can also, the thing that George Powell, at least when he initially started, was known for replacement animation. So rather than moving a puppet, you
Mm-hmm.
replace the whole or parts of the puppet with another sculpted section. So a walk
Mm-hmm.
cycle wouldn't just be a puppet that you're manipulating. It would be every frame you take out a puppet and put in a different puppet with a different pose. And it has a
Yeah.
very different look and feel. It's so charming.
Nice.
But anyway, yeah, I could go on and on.
Um, so let's see. Okay, so a lot of lay people have no concept of how difficult, time consuming, and expensive animation is. Can you tell us, when working on different projects in regard to time, how much are you trying to get done in one day?
It depends. Depends on the size of
Mm-hmm.
the production, depends on the
Mm-hmm.
budget, the timeline, the size of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can look at a show like Robot Chicken,
Mm-hmm.
and they have, um, an expectation in general that they would like animators to hit about 10 seconds a day,
Mm-hmm.
um, to sort of an average of 10 seconds a day. Some
Mm-hmm.
days you will do much less than that. Some days you may do much more than that. Depends on the complexity of the shot, how many
Right.
characters are in the shot, is there a camera move, is there a lighting effect, are there multiple passes. All of those things contribute to how long a shot will take, the complexity of the action. Is the character just talking, is it a talking head shot, or is it like,
Mm-hmm.
do they have to jump over a hill and tumble and do a karate chop?
Right.
So all that affects it, but on average, they want to try to hit 10 seconds a day. That's also with a support crew. So it's not just the
Mm-hmm.
animator setting everything up. It's an animator
Right.
arrives on stage, gets direction, and can go.
Mm-hmm.
If you're waiting for a setup, or you're waiting for a lighting change, or a puppet is broken, it's going to take more time. But so that would be like a decent sized budget television
Mm-hmm.
production would be 10 seconds a day per animator. If you're talking about a feature,
Mm-hmm.
that's very different. They may want to
Mm-hmm.
get 4 to 5 seconds done a week, right? It's a different level of animation. It's a different aesthetic, it's a different quality. So, and in features, you do pop throughs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rather than just animating once and it's good, or you redo it,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more similar to CG in that you sort of block things in. So you might do a blocking pass where it's like, these are all the prominent poses that
Mm-hmm.
the puppet will go through. Then you go back and maybe you animate it on sixes so that it
Mm-hmm.
pops. There's a few more poses in there. Maybe then you do it on twos,
Mm-hmm.
which is almost there, and then a final pass on ones. And so they may have to do the same shot multiple times in several days. So that's why
Yeah.
the quota, the expectation is a little bit. You're not expected to do as much. And then there's all sorts of in-betweens. I've been on projects where you're expected to do 20 seconds a day because it's simpler animation. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just objects, not acting or not puppets. So
Yeah.
Anyway, it runs the gamut.
I just wanted to make sure to get on camera that it was like seconds a day and then you went to seconds a week. I was like, yeah, we need to get this on camera.
Yeah, it just depends on the project, but yeah, they're on
Like
especially
seconds.
seconds. Oh yeah, and that's per animator. So if you on a television
Yeah.
production, you may have 12 animators or something. So it's 12 animators a day doing 10 seconds a day. That does add up.
It adds up. So okay, you worked on a lot of movies, some of which you mentioned in TV shows and shorts, and I won't list them all. You have listed a couple of them, but you mentioned Celebrity Deathmatch, Phantom Investigators, Elf the movie, Moral Oral Holidays, the Christmas that almost didn't happen, Robot Chicken, the TV short and the television series, Bratz, Graves, Mary Shelley's Frankenhole, and then that's not even your whole IMDb, and then that it doesn't include like all of the commercials and music videos that aren't on your IMDb. So
Right. Yes. Oh, I forgot to
um,
mention BixPix. BixPix is another studio here in LA that does stop motion. Anyway, sorry.
nice. I mean, the people want the information, so like, okay, to go back to Celebrity Deathmatch, that was a big show from my middle school and high school days. How was it working on that show and seeing it get so popular?
It's funny because a lot of times when you're working on a project, it's months before it comes out, so you don't you're not working on it when it's out, when it's popular. It's a little bit different if it's an ongoing show.
Yeah.
But it was a trip. That was my first stop motion job, so I didn't know what to expect. And it was really popular, and it was cool. It was MTV threw some of the best parties. Yeah, they're great parties, but and they gave some good swag. That's one of the advantages of projects getting like a cool jersey or a jacket or a bag or something like that. But yeah, it was cool. I mean, it was you're kind of in the eye of the storm when you're on a popular project, so it doesn't feel like, oh wow, it's so cool. It's cool. It's great to get paid to animate and stuff, but it's it's a job. It's like you show up, you do your job. Sometimes you work really hard. Sometimes you work into the night. Some days are easier than others. So for me, that was a job where I cut my teeth and got to meet a lot of really cool people, and it was my entrance into the stop motion community. And not as much anymore because there's more stop motion going on, in part because of the digital technology, in part because there's such a big need for content. So there's so much more going on than there was when I first started. But for a good 10 years of my career, we were like a roving band of gypsies. Like, this little stop motion community would go from New York to Portland to San Francisco to, some people went over to the UK because, you had to follow the work. It's so specialized that you followed the work. And some people, they'd find a community that they liked, like Portland, and just settle in and then find a way to get other work, or wait until a stop motion project, or start their own studio so that they could make their own work. But now, because there's more production, there's more hubs like LA and Portland, there's less travel. But even in the last maybe 6, 7, 8 years, I've done traveling for work. I did work in Texas, went to Portland for some projects. So yeah.
So Robot Chicken is another popular stop motion franchise out there, and you were a co-animation director for that. How was it stepping into a leadership role for that show?
It was good. It was so so sort of stepping back a little bit. I had been in Portland for a couple of years on a show at Vinton called Gary and Mike. It was a primetime show for UPN. Went down to San Francisco for a little bit on Phantom Investigators that you mentioned. I was back in Portland, and it was sort of before Vinton became Leica. And there just wasn't as much work for me up there. So I ended up applying for a job in LA at the Kyoto Brothers. Came down, took a test. Did not think I was going to get the job because there were 30 people also testing for the same job, but I did get it. So moved to LA, worked on that, freelanced for them for a few years on that project, and then we also shot Elf there. I was in LA freelancing for Kyoto Brothers for a couple of years. Got to work on The Simpsons for them, which was cool. But work started to get slower and a little bit more, just not as frequent. I was starting to get a little bit frustrated and starting to feel like, I want to do some other things. I wanted to maybe get back to doing some 2D, brush up on my CG skills. I also knew I wanted to teach. So I would go back to school. So I applied to and got into CalArts, the graduate program there. And of course, just as I got in, Robot Chicken got picked up to series and became the sort of a hub of work here in LA. So it's just weird timing, but fortunately I organized my schedule. I knew that I would have to work while I was still in school, so I organized my schedule so I had chunks of days off. So I would freelance as a day player on different projects while I was still in school that first year. So I did actually get to work on the first season of Robot Chicken as an animator because they needed people to fill in, and I needed to make money, and I had some free days open because of my academic schedule. So so I've known those guys for forever, and was on the first season, and then my second and third year in school, I got a fellowship, so I didn't need to work, which is great. They gave me a stipend, and so I had as much freelancing for the rest of my time in school. But then when I finished up at school, it was kind of amazing timing, but a number of animators had left the production to work on some of their own things, and so they needed some people, and they knew me, and I had just finished up school, so I jumped right back in and started working for the show again. I think it was season 4 by the time I got back to it. And I was just an animator there. The studio, the production changed studios, and a couple of years later, I was hired as a director for the Bratz project. The production started at Shadow Machine, and then they founded their own studio, Stupid Buddies, and so I got hired at Stupid Buddies as a director to direct the web series. And then when that was over, there were a number of different projects going on at the studio, and I think the circumstances where there's a production deadline, and so they needed stuff done. So they had started a couple satellite locations to get the show finished in time, and so as I finished directing the Bratz project, they needed someone else to direct all the remote locations for Robot Chicken. So I joined back on as co-animation director for the remainder of that season. But your question was, what was it like to step into a leadership role? And it wasn't. By the time I stepped into the leadership role on that project, I had already had a number of leadership roles. So it was, it was great to work with those folks again. It wasn't all that different from other projects where I had been animation director or director. What was nice is that, it was sort of a system that had been set up already. So it wasn't like I started anything from scratch. I sort of was, kind of filling in because the director had to bounce around to different locations. And I was just sort of, I was there sort of, keeping it running until he could come back and take a look at the shots or approve things. So, yeah. Anyway, long story longer.
So you worked on the Bratz TV show. Now, when people look at stop motion puppets, they'll probably associate them with being dolls. But what are the key differences between a stop motion puppet and a doll we would pick up in the store?
The main difference is that the puppet is designed specifically for animation. So a doll may have a type of structure or type of armature, but it's not necessarily made to be animated. It can be animated, and on a show like Robot Chicken, a lot of those, at least the earlier seasons, actually were just toys. But for Bratz specifically, one of the things that we did was we started with the toy. We wanted them to look like the toy, so we took a mold of the toys and then designed the armature to fit within that shape. And so there's a lot of experimentation and trial and error, but that's the key difference, is that it's the armature, it's the structure underneath the skin that allows you to really pose the puppet and allows you to keep their position. That's probably the main difference, but it's also the material. Depends on the puppet specifically, but it could be silicone, or it could be latex, rubber, or it could even be a hard plastic thing. But underneath that is the bones, the structure, the armature that allows you to really pose it. Another difference is, for instance, on Bratz specifically, one of the tricky things about that show was that each character, each Brat, has a number of different fashion accessories and styles and haircuts and lipsticks, right? And they have different lipsticks to match different outfits. And we worked really closely with the MGA, the company that makes the dolls, to design them so that they were animation friendly, but also, they had a hair stylist, and they have a whole group of people that designs the fashion and the look for those dolls. And so we worked with them, and but we couldn't just make 50 versions of the puppet. We had to, we had a production budget and schedule, and it takes time to make all those puppets. So we had a number of different outfits for each doll, but we couldn't make an endless amount of mouths. We have something called replacement mouths in stop motion, where it's very much like blender shapes in CG, right? You have different shapes that you pop on to make it look like they're smiling or happy or talking or whatever.
Right.
And because the puppets had multiple different lipsticks to go with different outfits, we actually came up with the solution of making green screen lips. So the lips themselves were painted green, and then in post we would add, so we didn't have to make 10 different lips. I think each doll had 3 to 4 different outfits, and therefore 3 to 4 different lipstick colors, and we couldn't make all of those. So we made the green screen lips, and in post we changed the color so that we could we only had to make a much smaller amount of lips that were interchangeable. So anyway, yeah. But that was one of the trickiest parts of that project. But we we started with the dolls, but ended up, we wanted to make sure on screen they looked very much like the dolls, but also were actual puppets. So they're not
Yeah.
actually the dolls on screen.
So, typically people think of, and this still is related to the Bratz, like people typically think of hair being, free flowing, but how is the hair on the Bratz? Like, because you had to animate the hair for the different characters and they had different personalities, so their hair moved differently. And, it wasn't free flowing hair. So, how can you explain that?
Yeah, so very much like the puppet itself, if you want hair to be animated, you have to make an armature in there. So we actually had a couple people in the puppet fabrication department that specialized in hair, and they they made the hairstyles and then put wires in as they were fabricating it, so that you can pose just like the puppet itself. You can pose the hair if the hair has to be flowing or whatever, and so you hide the wires in there. There were certain puppets that had big bushy ponytails, and so there was a wire in there also, but it would be a foam appliance, so like a foam latex appliance that we would then cover with or paint with different hair textures so that it looked like hair but could move a little bit differently. So we used doll hair, but it just was, we would hide wires in it so we could pose it. And then the same thing is true of like clothing and outfits. If you have a long flowing dress, you want to have as much control over that dress as you can. So you hide wires or wire mesh in there that allows you to pose it, but also allows you to move it. And one of my friends, she was the head of the costume department at the studio at the time, and one of the ways that she describes it, it's like an armature on top of an armature. So you have to have an armature for the hair or for the clothes that fits into and attaches to the armature of the puppet itself.
Yeah. So okay, I am in 3D animation. I'm a 3D modeler. What has always been mind-boggling for me, even being in animation, is that, of course, when I was in school, I did your like simple stop motion projects, so I can wrap my head around animating like one character. But when you get into the multiple characters, like backgrounds moving, how do y'all keep all of that straight? Like, I don't understand. It just like my mind explodes because it's like frame by frame. So how are you doing this?
Yeah, it's a little daunting even when you're doing it. But one of the things that we, back in the day, there was nothing. You had to use your memory. There's a, there is a. One of the things I tell my students is there really aren't. There's almost nothing that's made specifically for stop motion. It's a lot of like, oh, that tool looks like it could be used for this, and then we sort of hijack things. And so one of the things that was sort of hijacked in traditional stop motion is called a surface gauge, and it's a way of measuring things. And so it's what like Ray Harryhausen used to use, and a lot of the old school animators before there was a digital playback or any way to sort of check your animation while you're doing it. You had this little measuring thing called a surface gauge, and you would point to a portion of the puppet, and then you'd see, like, maybe you'd point to the nose, right? It's this little pointer. I have one around. I'm in my studio now. I could go grab it at some point. But so you point it, say to the nose of the puppet, and then you move it a little bit, and you use that pointer to see how far it's moved. Then you take it out of the frame, and then you take the picture.
Okay.
There's actually some in some. I don't remember which movie it is, but in at least one Ray Harryhausen movie, there's this giant monster attacking, and then there's this giant surface gauge that's in the frame because he left it in for one frame. And when you're back in the day, when you were cutting film, you couldn't cut out a single frame because you had to cement splice the footage together when you were editing, and that cement splice overlaps a frame, so you couldn't take out a single frame. So they left it in. But
it's like the Coke can or something in Game of Thrones.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. So that was the old school way that animators would see how they were doing, and a lot of it just relied on their memory and their knowledge of animation timing and the surface gauge. And then you wouldn't see till you got the footage developed, sometimes days or weeks later. And that was the standard for 70 years, 80 years or something, right? But then with the advent of digital technology, on Nightmare Before Christmas, I have a couple of friends who worked on that. And my understanding is they had a 3 frames they could see digitally, right? So it was like the first time you could see like, oh, okay, I can actually, and it wasn't, my understanding is it didn't even play back. It was like onion skin cross dissolve, right? And so that was a huge step. That's part of the reason, obviously they're incredibly talented animators. Part of the reason why that film, certainly at the time, looked so good was because they had this new technology. A couple of years later, and something that was developed in Portland was called the Animation Lunchbox. And that was a little
self-contained school.
Absolutely, great. And so it's just this little self-contained box. You plug your camera in, and then you can plug the output into another device. You can record directly from that. So when I was on Celebrity Deathmatch, we didn't have those. We shot digitally, but we were shooting directly into Premiere at the time, and just revealing all the secrets. We shot directly into Premiere at the time, but we wouldn't see the finished animation till we rendered it out, right? But when we were on that production, there were a couple of animators, one of whom is now the animation supervisor at Leica, Brad Schiff. They got one of the animation lunchboxes, and we saw like very quickly how much their animation improved. And so then the production was like, animation lunchboxes for everyone. So then we got, everybody got animation lunchboxes, and you could see people improving because you could play it back real time as you were animating. You could see how it was playing back, and it just was huge. It was huge. And so then jump forward a couple more years, and the standard right now is something called Dragon Frame, which is a software program. You can also use it for pencil testing for 2D animation as well, but it's a program that was designed and built by Jamie Kaleri and his brother Diami. Jamie is an animator director, and Diami is a computer programmer. So they designed this program really just for them. And for Jamie. And then my understanding of the story is that another mutual friend was working on production with them as an animator, Tennessee. And he said, wow, this is great. You should sell this. And then apparently they did. And they may have had those plans before, but my understanding is that was one of the impetuses. So now they started this software program. It's been a few years now, but they sell this software program, and it captures real time. It uses digital SLR cameras, any camera, use a video camera, whatever. You can even use your phone, and it's a digital capturing system. You can play it back real time as you're capturing it. You can go back. You can move things around in the timeline. You can import different footage in. It's an incredible program, and it's the standard. It's actually relatively inexpensive. I think it's about $300, which, considering what the software can do, it's really relatively inexpensive. But it's the standard. It's the standard what Leica uses. It's what I use. It's what every pretty much every animation studio uses on every stage to capture, and it allows you to keep track of everything. You can play things back, you can create lighting effects, you can look at you can match things in onion scan. There's all kinds of tools that you can use, and it just allows you to keep track of things as you're going. So it's a performance. It's still one frame at a time. You got to keep track of all the different things, but it's this playback, this digital tool that you can see it. So it's not a mystery what things are moving. And sometimes you'll, I forgot to move that guy. You'll see it like 6 frames later. But if you're paying attention and you really are tracking things, that program allows you to just see it and play it back and see what you're animating.
I just would like to input that, okay, so I'm big on nostalgia, and then I'm not a hoarder, but I make bad purchases sometimes. So before moving to LA, one of the few things I was not able to get rid of was a lunchbox that I purchased 2 or 3 years ago because I used it in college, and I'm like, fast forward, I'm like, bro, I'm not gonna use this. Why did I buy this? And now I gotta like put it back on eBay. So once I get it out of storage, I'll be trying to sell it again. Right. I'm just like, why did I purchase?
At the time, I'm sure it was, it was like, hey, let me use this, right? But yeah,
I'll be using stuff. I'll be wasting money sometimes.
That's great.
So can you tell, like, how is CG used in stop motion today?
It depends. It depends again on the size of the production. A lot of the ways that CG is used is as an effect. So almost every stop motion production has to go through a post-production pipeline, and they may need to add some visual effects. And then maybe that's lasers that, if you're talking about a superhero shooting lasers out of their hands or whatever, they'll usually add that in post. Or a lighting effect could be done in post. A lot of times, for ease of production or for effects, if you've got a flying character, it's shot on a green screen, and then they composite that into the scene. But it does depend on the project. I know that there are a number of projects, for instance, where there was an Apple commercial a few years ago where the entire set was practical. It was a stop motion set. They lit with real things, real lights, but then all the characters were CG. So it was this mixed media commercial. It's a brilliant commercial. It's really, really cool looking. But all the sets were practical, all the characters were digital. There may be circumstances where I know Leica now uses digital characters if they have a big crowd scene. It's one of the crowd scenes are tough in CG too, but just because you have so many assets, so many characters, you got to make them look different. But and the same thing is true in stop motion, because there are actual puppets that you have to animate. And sometimes if there's a big crowd scene, there'll be multiple animators. So I've been on projects where it's a huge set. I'm the lead animator on that shot, and so I'm responsible for maybe the foreground characters, but then I may have an assistant or a second animator animating other background characters, just because it's too much. It would take too long to animate all those. So one of the things that Leica's been doing, to my understanding at least, is that they've been, main characters, foreground characters, prominent characters are all actual puppets, but if they need a big crowd, there'll be CG puppets that will fill out the crowd or fill out the scene, because that way it's less on stage time. On stage time is some of the most expensive time, because you've got an animator and a stage crew and lights and a space, whereas you can pop in those CG characters with a couple of people in a computer. So
what kind of stories do you tell with your studio Platypus Picture Works?
It depends. So I got the studio space in 2011 just to work on some of my own projects. And then in 2012, I got hired really for the first time as a director on a project. It was a short film based on a concept album by the artist A Fine Frenzy, Alison Sudol, or Sudol. And I had worked for the producer as an intern when I was in school. It was a CG production, but she knew that I was an intern in the production offices. But she knew that I did stop motion. And I love stop motion, and Allison made this concept album about a tree and a bird and the relationship they had together, and she wanted to make a short film about that. And the producer remembered me, asked if I was interested. So it was really the first time I got hired to direct. And so I had the studio, which was great, and then got another space, this office that I'm in right now. So I had a stage and an office, and spent 6 months in the studio making this short with some friends and a small crew. And then I kept the space. And so for the last, I mean, really since specifically since I graduated from Cal Arts in 2008, I have been freelance. So I may work as an animator on a production like Robot Chicken. I may be hired as an animation supervisor for a series of commercials like the Happy Honda Days commercials. And then I may be hired, directly and be able to use my studio space to make something. So there've been a number of commercials and short films and short projects that rather than going through another studio, they contact me directly and I'm hired, and then I use my studio to make the production. So really since 2012, I've been, before that I was mainly an animator. Then I started moving into leadership roles like lead animator, then animation supervisor, and a number of different things. And then since 2012, I've been doing more directing. So as a freelance, it was sort of like you got to hustle and keep the work flowing. So sometimes I'd go into a studio to work on stuff. Sometimes I'd work on it here. And it really just would depend on what I got hired for. I have my own projects, my own things, mainly at this point that I concentrate on writing those things. But I have the studio space so that I can work on my own projects. And at the time, so that I could take freelance jobs as a producer, as a director, a supervisor, if need be. I actually just signed on full-time as a staff member at a 2D animation studio. I've been with them for about a year, directing a project that has yet to come out. Should come out, I think, either by the end of this year, beginning of next year. Really excited about it. It's a great studio, 6-point harness, and I've really enjoyed my time there. And like I said, 2D was my first love. I love stop motion, and it really, it's given me a career for 20 years, and it's given me the ability to travel around the world, or at least around the country, and work on very different projects with a lot of cool people, and I love it, and I still teach it at USC. But right now I'm staff at a 2D studio, so that's a different and exciting challenge. And in the time of Corona, I feel so, we've been working remote for, I think, 24 weeks or something. And so don't go into the studio, but I have my own studio space so that I can at least get out of my apartment. And I don't have to, it's just me in the studio, so I can, I come here and I direct from here. So it just depends, but I'm glad to keep the space because now I can use it to make some of my own things, which I'm excited to do.
A few more questions. What do you love about teaching?
I, as you may have figured out, I love animation. I really just in my heart, I love it so much. I love watching it. I love doing it. I love the history. And so for me, as a teacher, I want to try to share that love and that knowledge that I've gained over the course of my time in this industry. And so that's what I love. I love, I think a lot of times people misunderstand, I learned so much from my students. Just they keep me fresh, they keep me engaged in a way that I don't think that I would be if I wasn't teaching. There's a hunger for knowledge and excitement about it in a way that the industry can sometimes be quite jaded. People, I've been doing this for years, that kind of thing. But there's an excitement when you're working with students. There's a hunger for that knowledge. And so that I learn from them, and that keeps me excited about this thing that I do. So it inspires me, but I also I like to inspire them, and I want to show them that you can make a career out of this. It's not always easy, but I want to share my love and my knowledge, and that is exciting for me. Obviously I don't know everything, but I do have a certain level of experience and expertise, and I want to share that and pass that along to a new generation of folks. So that's, I love nurturing talent and inspiring them as much as I can, and helping them to find their own voice and their vision and make their own projects. So that's what I love about teaching.
Nice. A statement. This isn't really a question, but a statement that I skipped. I know you said before, that you've read things about animation from people not in animation, and a lot of information is wrong. And you had a light bulb moment of that being applied to other subjects. And so I just want to tell you that I have had the same realization with the live action Lion King, where I questioned my degree for a little, do I know what I'm doing? And then I was like, oh no, these people just don't know what they're talking about because it's fully animated. And so during that period of time where that movie was coming out, I was like, this is how scientists feel. Where a bunch of people are just thinking that they know what they're talking about, and they're not. And I'm just like, but I'm an expert. Listen to me.
Yeah, exactly. Especially right now.
And then I even had a colleague where I was discussing this with him, and I'm like, why are you confused? I'm like, what? Why am I having this conversation with you? This is for what? It's fully animated. But so. Yeah,
no, I mean, I think that, I think that happens all the time. It's I'll see something and it's that's not, I don't think that's right. and I mean, it gets a little bit scary if people are doing reports or doing investigation or journalism and they don't quite get it right, that misinformation is out there. And so, it requires people that take their time and get the research right and get the quotes right. And I think, that is everyone's goal, and sometimes things slip through the cracks. So, but yeah, it is strange. There is and I think that's any subject, when you're an expert at something and then there's a lay person talking about the same thing, they get it wrong, and that's going to happen. And, it's up to us that know a little bit more to try to get the right information out there.
Yeah. And through interviewing people like you, I've kind of discovered the importance of people like me in the animation industry, asking the questions, because you're closer to it, and you can, because some reading some things and watching some things, I'm like, there's better questions to ask, or or you get the same basic questions all the time. And so I try to ask new questions when I can. So I imagine, with the like you mentioned earlier, with the stop motion community being so small, it's probably a close-knit community. But there are tangential experiences through the years. So have you ever endured any discriminatory things in your career, whether conferences, or I'm not sure if you have, but have you?
I don't. It is a small community, and it's a pretty close-knit community, but like any community, it's made up of people in the real world. So
Yeah.
I don't think that I've been consciously discriminated against in any way, but I'm a Black man in America, so
Yeah.
that comes with certain it comes with a history, and it comes with certain experiences. And so
Yeah.
I honestly don't feel like I haven't been hired on it. We're not going to hire the Black
Yeah.
guy. That just doesn't happen, at least to my knowledge. But I do think that there are times when I certainly have seen people with a fraction of my experience get a job that I certainly was qualified for,
Right.
and I wasn't even considered for the job, or maybe I was considered and I wasn't the right fit. It's hard to tell,
Yeah.
Um,
There's always that questioning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I'm friends with a lot of the people that I work with and work for. So and I've gotten a lot of great opportunities. It's not
Right.
it's not like I'm not a starving artist. But again, we live in a society in the same way that it is just harder for people to get opportunities, whether it's as a woman or as a person of color. It is sometimes trickier, and sometimes it's just a comfortability and feeling like, there's no one in here that's like me. I know I've shown up on jobs and no one said anything. At this point in my career, maybe 85% of the time, I am the only Black person or one of two on a project. Like I like to say, I'm still the only Black director that I've worked with. So, I don't think there's overt discriminatory practices. And I think I have had a certain level of success, or, again, I'm fortunate in that I have only had to earn money, or the only way that I've earned money since graduating school is in animation, whether it's teaching or whether it's working or freelancing or directing, animating, whatever. I earn my living through a career in animation. And that's not everybody, so I feel incredibly lucky. I put hard work in and time in. But there certainly have been times when I sort of like, how did that person get that job? They don't seem to have as much experience as me. But, again, I don't know why the choice was made, and I've had a lot of great experiences and a lot of great opportunities. But there certainly have been times on productions where I've stood up and said, I think this imagery is wrong. I think the writing here is offensive. I think, can we think about doing something differently for this? There was a project I was on where, sort of the standard cartoon gag, somebody had a stick of dynamite or something, and it exploded. And the post-explosion sure looked like blackface to me. And so I said something, and I honestly don't think that they had thought about it. It was just like, oh, this character needs to look ashen, right? This white character needs to look ashen. But looking at it as a as a Black man, it was like, this is way too close.
Right.
And to their credit, the director said, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Of course, yeah, we're going to have to change that. And they did, And I think for me, having an established career, at the time I was a little bit greener, but having an established career and feeling comfortable with the people that I work with, and know, because it is a small knit community, I feel, it's not always easy, but I feel like it's my responsibility to say something. If I see something that is like, oh, that's questionable to me, I don't think I'm particularly sensitive in that way, but if it says something to me, I'm going to say something about it. The other way that I think, certainly in a leadership role, I feel like I want to make sure that projects that I'm on are inclusive, and that includes, behind the scenes, and whether it be animators, directors, writers, etc. I want to make sure that there are people that look like me as much as I can on a production that I have anything to say with. At the same time, there's also times where on a project. I can think of a project that I was a commercial I was directing, and there were no people. It was all objects, but it took place in a classroom. And worked with a great crew of people, and the production designer and set dresser had organized the classroom set. And I noticed on the wall, in kids' classrooms, they have names and stuff like that. And all the names were sort of like generic white American names. And I felt like maybe no one will notice, but I'll notice. And so I encouraged them to have a diverse series of names, whether that was Indian names, Asian names, and certainly Black names, or what we think of as Black names, because those representation matters, diversity matters. And so I try to do that whenever I have the opportunity to do that. But long answer longer, I don't feel like I've been discriminated against in a overt way. But again, I'm a Black man in America, so I'm sure that it has happened, whether unconsciously or not. That there are certain opportunities that I haven't gotten because people didn't think about me in that way, or didn't feel like I could do it. And that's changing. And one of the things that I'm quite frankly, excited about the studio that I'm at is that it is the most diverse studio that I've ever worked at. In all roles, up and down the board. Animators, designers, directors, people of all different shades, people, different ethnicities, different cultures, and a diversity of women as well. And I know that 6 point. That's important to them, and so they work at it. And I think the thing that's tricky is if you're not conscious of it, it's not going to happen. And I think one of the things that that I love about the studio where I am is that they are conscious of it, and they're always going to hire the best people for the job, but they will also seek out people that wouldn't normally be sought out, and that's important.
Yeah, and I feel like both the examples that you gave were like why diversity is important. It's that unconscious bias where you see stuff happen with H&M, or there's people who at this point you think they're doing it on purpose because like you really keep messing up. But it's like is no one in the room to like say this?
Exactly.
And so you're in the room.
Exactly, and often there isn't someone in the room. Again, I have. Almost every project that I've been on, whether it's as an animator, supervisor, director, or producer, I am more likely than not the only Black person on that production. And so I try at least to seek out people that look like me because I think it's important. But
So wrapping it up, is there a project you have in mind? Like a personal project like that combines all your loves, like a nonpartisan informational voting stop motion short that has old school hip hop music laced in the background, like
that's hilarious. I think my influences and my the things that I as an animator, one of the things that's so important as a storyteller really is observation and sort of taking in the things that you like and that you listen to and that you watch and that you digest, and those come out sometimes unconsciously, but sometimes very consciously in the things that you do. So one of the things that I've been doing the past few years is writing, and I have a couple of different writing partners, and we have a couple of different projects that we've been developing, and right now one of them is actually in development that we're working on, and it's really exciting, and it does incorporate some of those things. I have a lot of different ideas, so some of them will come out in different ways in different projects, but I'm again, I love stop motion. I love mixed media. I love, I love animation, but I'm excited to work on show concepts and concepts that sort of incorporate the things that I like to do and the stories that I want to tell. I want to tell all kinds of stories. I want to tell stories about Black people, but I want to tell stories about all kinds of people. And that's one of the things that's so great about animation is anything that you can imagine, you can do.
Right.
And yet we sort of have this small, the small sort of band that we've been doing over and over again. And so I want to try to tell some different kinds of stories, or at least using different kinds of people. And that's important to me. But yeah, I mean, I got some things brewing, and hopefully they'll come out soon enough. But yeah, that's exciting to me. It's a new challenge. Working in 2D as a director is a new challenge, and
yeah.
It's really exciting. And as much as I can, I again, I'm still teaching stop motion at USC, so I want to incorporate stop motion into as much work as I can because I love it so much, and it's given me a career. But excited about writing and developing new ideas in the 2D animation space.
So how can people follow you and your work?
You rehearsed
social
that
medias and your website.
Yeah, so my website is platypuspictureworks.com. And I am on Instagram at, I think it's what is it? I should have rehearsed this. I think it's no, let me look it up right now because I honestly don't remember.
You just be on there.
I don't think about it. I made the name and then I'm, let's see.
And then you lived life.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so it is Musa, Moosay Brooker. That's my handle on Instagram. And yeah, I'm on Twitter too, but usually my Twitter is just a reposting of my Instagram. All those links are at my website, so if you go to the website, you can track me down from there. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Musa, for coming to the BlkWmnAnimator YouTube channel.
Of course, thank you.
This inspires other stop motion animators.
Yeah. I mean, I that's what it's all about, and I thank you for all the work that you're doing and sort of the platform that you've got here. Anytime you want me to come back, talk about anything else, maybe when the project that I'm directing now comes out, we can talk about that.
Nice.
But yeah, I think it's wonderful. We're living in such strange times. And I think it's important to use, your platform the way that you're doing to bring a voice and enlighten things that maybe aren't always seen in the world of animation. Right. And thank you for putting up with my sleepy answers. And it's an honor to meet you and an honor to be your guest. So thank you so much.
Thanks. And to everyone out there, I would like you to like so I know it's real, comment and tell me how you feel, subscribe to Seal the Deal, and sign up for post notifications to show your zeal. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.